Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're heading to Southeast Asia, gonna really get under the skin of Malaysia's global trade situation as we're seeing it shape up for 2025.
Yeah, we've got some interesting analysis here. It points to a pretty pivotal moment for Malaysia, actually. Some real opportunities, definitely, but also, well, some significant challenges.
Right. Malaysia's obviously a key player in that whole international commerce scene. So this analysis, it's helping us tackle that central question, isn't it?
Which is really, how can Malaysia not just, tread water, but actually boost its global trade position with all the turbulence out there?
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe their strengths. Where are they coming from a position of, well, strength?
Makes sense. Well, a huge one, can't ignore it, is their established electrical and electronic sector, the E&E sector.
Ah, yes, E&E. That's been their cornerstone for a while.
Decades, yeah. Serious investment, building up this really robust hub. I mean, it accounts for something like 40% of their total exports.
40%. That's huge.
It really is. And it's not just churning stuff out. It's the whole ecosystem. The infrastructure, the expertise, especially in tricky areas like semiconductors and high-tech supply chains, they've got a real advantage there.
Okay, so specialization is key. But it's not just what they make, it's also where they are, right? Location seems important too.
Absolutely. Being right there in the heart of Southeast Asia is a massive plus. And their role in ASEAN is critical. That bloc represents, about 27% of their total trade.
And isn't Malaysia actually chairing ASEAN this year in 2025?
Exactly. Which is, it's a fantastic opportunity for them to show some regional leadership, maybe shape some policy, really drive the agenda.
Good timing for that. And outside the region, they're plugged into bigger networks too, aren't they?
Yeah, they're in those key trade pacts. You've got RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership 1.
Right.
And being part of those give them preferential access, better tariff rates to a whole range of global markets. It's a definite boost for exports.
Okay, so a strong E&E base, great location, ASEAN leadership this year, and access through these major trade deals sounds pretty solid. And they're looking to build on that, I gather.
Definitely. They've got this proactive industrial policy, the new Industrial Master Plan 2030. NIMP 2030, they call it.
Right, NIMP 2030. What's the focus there?
It's really targeting those high-growth, future-facing sectors, things like green technology, aerospace, the digital economy. It signals a clear move and ambition to climb up the value chain, get into more advanced stuff.
Moving up the value chain. Makes sense. Okay, that paints a strong picture. But inevitably, there are weaknesses, vulnerabilities. What are the main worries highlighted in the analysis?
Well, that big strength, the ENEA sector, it's also potentially a big weakness.
How so? The concentration risk.
Exactly. Relying so heavily on one sector makes them pretty vulnerable if that specific industry hits a rough patch globally. And we're sort of seeing that now with the semiconductor slowdown.
Yeah. How's that impacting them?
Well, E&E export growth, it dropped quite a bit. From about 8.5% growth in 2024, it slowed to just 3% in early 2025. That's a noticeable cooling off.
Yeah, 3% is a lot less than 8.5%. Definitely shows that dependence risk. Are there other dependencies? Commodities, maybe?
That's the other side of the coin, yes. They still rely quite a bit on things like palm oil, crude petroleum, LNG, and those markets, as you know, can be incredibly volatile.
Subject to global price swings.
Precisely. We saw, for instance, mining exports drop. I think it was 16.6% year-on-year in March 2025. That kind of volatility can really rock the boat for their overall trade numbers.
Okay, so sector concentration and commodity exposure. What about the overall trade balance? I saw some headlines about the surplus shrinking.
Yeah, that's definitely a trend to watch. What's happening is imports are rising, especially capital goods, machinery, equipment for future production. Those were up like 35.3% in March.
Wow, big jump in imports.
Yeah, and when that happens at the same time, export growth is weaker, your trade surplus narrows. It actually hit a 4-year low back in January 2025. Just MYR 3.6 billion.
Yeah. And how does that compare?
That was a massive 64% drop compared to the same month the year before, 64%. It really flags a potential imbalance starting to creep in.
Okay, a 64% drop definitely gets your attention. So maybe investing for the future, but it's squeezing the current balance.
Right.
Are there domestic pressures adding to this? Costs?
Yes. Absolutely. Internal costs are a factor. You've got inflation projected around, say, 2.5% to 3.5% for 2025. That puts pressure on businesses.
Standard inflationary pressure.
Right. But then you also have planned subsidy reforms, things like fuel, electricity. Now, these might be good for government finances long-term, but short-term. they could push up production costs.
Making Malaysian goods potentially less competitive on price internationally.
Exactly. It could erode that edge.
And one other potential weakness I saw mentioned, something about smaller businesses, SMEs.
Yeah, that's an important point. Malaysia's been pretty good at attracting foreign direct investment, FDI, especially with companies looking to diversify supply chains away from, well,
The whole China plus one idea.
Right. But the question is, how well are local small and medium enterprises, the SMEs, actually plugging into these new global value chains being set up?
Are they getting a piece of the action?
Kind of. If they're not deeply integrated, if they don't become real partners, then the broader benefits for the Malaysian economy, like local jobs, tech sharing, might be limited. It might not spread as widely as hoped.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, quite a list of potential drags. E&E reliance, commodity prices, that shrinking surplus, domestic cost pressures, and making sure SMEs are actually benefiting. It's a lot to manage.
It certainly is.
But let's flip back to the positive side. Where are the big opportunities for Malaysia to, really push forward?
Well, one obvious strategy is market diversification. They're actively trying to build stronger ties beyond their traditional partners.
Looking further afield.
Yeah, looking towards emerging economies. Think BRICS nations, Africa, Latin America, trying to reduce that reliance on just a few big markets. And using those existing FTAs like RCP and CPTPP is key to opening those doors.
Spreading the risk, basically. Makes sense. And this ties back into that NIM 2030 plan, too, I imagine.
Absolutely. And MP 2030 is all about deliberately shifting towards those high-value sectors we mentioned, green tech, aerospace, digital. By nurturing these, they aim to move away from just competing on cost in lower margin stuff.
Positioning for future growth industries.
Exactly. Capitalizing on where global demand is heading.
And that ASEAN chairmanship we talked about, how can they leverage that specifically?
Well, it gives them a real platform. They can champion initiatives to make regional supply chains stronger, more resilient. They can push for more trade within ASEAN itself. And maybe crucially, they can lead a collective voice against rising protectionism globally.
A united front within ASEAN could carry more weight. Interesting. And what about that China plus one trend? Is that purely an opportunity?
It definitely presents an opportunity to attract more FDI, no doubt. Companies are looking to diversify manufacturing. But like we touched on with the SME.
It comes with caveats.
Right. The real win for Malaysia is if they can ensure that investment integrates deeply with the local economy. It needs to create strong linkages, sustainable jobs, skills development for Malaysian workers. It can't just be an isolated foreign operation.
So strategic positioning is key there. Okay. Opportunities are there. Diversification, high-value sectors, ASEAN leadership, carefully managing that FDI influx. Now, the flip side again, the threats. What are the major external dangers looming?
Well, unfortunately, the list is pretty significant here, too. Top of the list probably is rising protectionism and just the general geopolitical messiness.
Trade tensions, basically.
Right.
U.S.-China.
That's a big part of it. The tech rivalry especially. Imagine hypothetical U.S. tariffs that the analysis mentioned, potential 24% tariff in 2025 hitting Malaysian exports, particularly E&E goods going to the U.S., which is their third biggest partner. That would hurt.
Ouch. Yeah, that would definitely sting.
And things like U.S. restrictions on selling advanced chips. That disrupts supply chains that run right through Malaysia. They get caught in the middle.
Caught in the crossfire. Okay, so geopolitics is a major threat. What else? General economic slowdown.
Yeah, that's definitely a factor. Slowing growth in key markets just means less demand for Malaysian stuff.
Yeah.
We saw exports to China dip in 2023.
China's their biggest partner, right?
Biggest, yes. And trade also declined with ASEAN and the EU in 2023. Partly due to weaker demand, so their main customers are buying less. That's fundamental.
A fundamental challenge. And what about competition closer to home within Southeast Asia?
Oh, it's fierce.
Yeah.
And intensifying. Countries like Vietnam, Thailand, they're also working hard to attract FDI, grow their manufacturing. They're direct competitors.
So Malaysia can't rest on its laurels, needs to keep innovating.
Absolutely. They have to constantly improve their value proposition to stay ahead or even keep pace.
And finally, just the overall global economic vibe, still pretty uncertain.
Yeah, the general climate of uncertainty, slower global growth, geopolitical instability, it hangs over everything. It threatens trade volumes, investment flows. Economists are suggesting Malaysia's GDP growth might slow down.
Slow down to what?
Potentially to around 4% in 2025, down from maybe 5.1% in 2024, if these trade headwinds really bite. So it shows the potential real-world impact.
Okay, so a tough environment. Protectionism, slowing demand, stiff regional competition, and just general global uncertainty potentially shaving a point off GDP growth. That's quite the storm to navigate.
Really is.
So pulling it all together, how is Malaysia trying to steer through this, and what's the sort of overall outlook? Cautious.
Well, as we've discussed, they are actively trying to mitigate things. They're pushing diversification. They've got the NIMP 2030 plan, focusing on higher value. They're trying to use that ASEAN leadership role.
Proactive steps, then?
Definitely. But yes, the outlook does seem tinged with caution. Economists are clearly flagging those risks, that potential growth slowdown.
So what does success depend on, ultimately?
I think it boils down to a few key things. Agile policy, being able to react quickly, successful implementation of NIMP 2030, really making that shift happen, upskilling the workforce for those new industries, and just skillfully navigating this really tricky geopolitical environment, both on their own and through ASEAN.
A lot rests on execution and navigating external factors, then. Okay, so it feels like a really critical moment for Malaysia, trying to balance these opportunities against some pretty serious headwinds in the global trade arena.
Absolutely. A pivotal time.
And for you listening, I think the key takeaway here is just how crucial strategic diversification, constant innovation, and potentially deep structural reforms are for a nation like Malaysia to really bolster its competitiveness going forward.
Yeah, and it makes you think more broadly, doesn't it? If a relatively established trading nation like Malaysia is facing all this, what does it mean for other economies? How should everyone, nations, businesses, individuals even, prepare for this landscape of, well, increasing uncertainty and competition? Thinking about Malaysia's situation might offer some valuable lessons for navigating our globalized but pretty volatile world.